The first week of the Countdown Cup was interesting, to say the least. So much craziness and so many unexpected results all at the same time. Will things normalize in week 22? Or was last week only the beginning of the Pick'em's Armageddon? Let's find out. Games for this week start out on Friday when the Chengdu Hunters roll up against the Dynasty. Based on early assumptions, these two have arguably benefited the most from the meta change. Chengdu are these clear underdogs, but the upset potential is always there with this group. Underestimating them would be a fatal mistake, but I'd say that Seoul are in a great position to stay on top against this specific opponent. Seoul's dive is just a lot stronger than it was last year. Smurf is just worlds better than Gesture on Winston, and Fitz looks so much better on the Sombra early on, as I found him to be pretty resourceful, and he's actively looking to shut down the opposing damage dealers. Seoul were incredibly dominant last week, and I'd like to assume that's going to continue, especially because Chengdu saw some ups and downs in return. Due to stronger Sombra and Winston play, I think I'm going to pick the Dynasty in a 3-1 score. With how Prophet has played this year, there's reason to have faith in him and Fitz as well to outplay their DPS counterparts. And with Smurf there too, Seoul are in excellent shape to get this W. It won't be easy, but they likely do hang on. Game number 2 on Friday morning is the Philly Fusion versus the Shanghai Dragons, and oh boy, let me start off by saying that Shanghai did not look pretty in that first week. The momentum that they had in the Summer Showdown is completely gone, and they failed to get much of anything going really, and that comes in spite of this meta in theory being really good for them since it's very similar to what they did last year. We could just chalk this up as Shanghai sandbagging, but it's not like they're in the clear and they're extremely comfortable. They don't even have the top record in their region for crying out loud. But even so, I'm still going to chalk this up as a classic Shanghai early stage struggle. If we go off of the trends for this team this year, in most scenarios they end up bouncing back after a bad first week. And in my eyes, Philly are the perfect vulnerable opponent to be taking advantage of. Having MN3 play Sombra over other stuff is going to put Philly at an automatic disadvantage based off of what I've seen in the little playtime so far. Their entire game plan revolves around this one man, and it's a lot harder for him to hit headshots and shoot down a team when he is stuck on Sombra. And because of that, I really do believe that Lip will take advantage and be the more significant playmaker in this series. I feel pretty comfortable giving this to the Shanghai Dragons in a 3-1. It's not going to be an easy game for them to win, but ultimately, their opponents are very inconsistent and they have more access to the comfort picks in this kind of meta, so I'd say that the Dragons come out on top unless they truly are sandbagging until the playoffs. In the first NA matchup of the week, the Gladiators will be playing against the Spitfire, and based on opening week, it's clear the Glads are once again feeling themselves. They looked very decisive in both of their victories, as Reiner seemed to be back in a groove, and they really were just benefiting from Shu's playmaking and consistency back in the lineup, and Kevzer's Tracer is always a plus too. Meanwhile, for London, they really didn't look all that comfortable to me. They had a good week, they won both of their games, but it was not special. I think that the fact that both Vancouver and Paris took maps away from them is a little concerning. It's clear that these less brawly compositions are not as good for them. Also, I'm not entirely sure if investing in Backbone the way they did last week is going to work against the Gladiators when Kevster and the Gladiator support line is just so much better. If the London Flex DPS and supports have a great game, this could end up getting uncomfortably close, but I just don't see it happening because the Glads are in such a groove, so I'll give it to them in a sweep. It's just a better meta for them, and I think they're more flexible. That's all there really is to it. Game 4 of the week is the Dallas Fuel versus the Vancouver Titans, and all I have to say here is pray for your boys in green. The Fuel look very good right now, and it's coming without Sparkle too. Doha is back in the lineup again, and his Sombra is still as dangerous as we all remember it being, and to be honest with you, Edison also seems to still be playing at a very high level. He is very confident in himself. And let's give the Vancouver Titans DPS the benefit of the doubt and say that they do keep up. Well, even if they do, what's their plan to stop Hanbin, you know? His signature Zarya and Sigma are so terrifyingly good, and his level of support is obviously superior compared to Mirror. Mirror, I just don't know if he has what it takes, considering all of the circumstances and the fact that he can't really match on any of Hanbin's good characters. And you also have to remember that the Titans are not going to have as much access to the Genji and Sojourn, which means that a lot of their comfort picks that made them good in the previous stage are gone. With all that in mind, the Dallas Fuel should be walking away with a sweep. Vancouver got the smoke last week, and they're probably getting it again unless they make significant strides in a very short amount of time against a very good Dallas team. Closing out Friday is the Shock and Defiant matchup, and oh man, this one is very confusing. To say that both teams were a letdown last week would be an understatement. I have a lot of doubts that the Shock are going to stay down for long, but if there was ever a time for them to continue failing, it would be this week. San Fran obviously struggled in the Diva matchup, and they didn't look amazing with or against the Sombra. The Shock were kind of confused, as it often felt like Proper was the only one doing much of anything. If we can see Hisu play that lights-out Sombra that he is known for, this upset might come to fruition. But for me, there's just no way that the Shock lose for a third consecutive time in the regular season. Their players are so quick to learn, and it's not like Toronto looked all that pretty either. So I'm going to give it to the Shock in a 3-1, and my main reasoning is that the support line will play better next week. Violet and Finn will clean up their play and not panic under pressure. They're going to outplay Twilight and Charong in a double flex support comp for sure, considering how much higher their peak is. And I mean, can we really trust the Defiant to win this game? They're still just a middle-of-the-pack team. It's obvious that they got hot at the right time during that tournament. I know the Shock struggled and all, but Toronto were also very inconsistent. They'd look good in one half of a series, then totally lost in the other, and that's not going to do it against a Shock team who is now in a very angry state of mind. Proper is going to make the enemy team feel his wrath. Just you wait and see. Moving on to Saturday, first is the Shanghai Dragons versus the Hangzhou Spark. And as much as I disliked the way Shanghai played last week, the Spark take it to a whole new level. To say that they looked lost would be an understatement. So many weird changes were going on with their support line, and general lineup for that matter, and it has people wondering if they even have what it takes anymore. Did you know that this team has only won one time since the start of the previous stage? They started this year off 9-3, by the way. If that isn't a sign that things are very off right now, then I don't know what to tell you. They clearly need a lot more time to gel together, and they are in a very panicked state. Right now, it's all about Shy. Nobody else is doing much of anything. And that's not enough to beat a Shanghai team who are going to be looking very angry. I believe that the Dragons are going to end up sweeping the Spark here, as there's just not much they can do. Regardless of their struggles, the Dragons are simply the better team. They usually capitalize on these opponents that do not know what they're doing. The Dragons may not be what they used to be, but they'll always make you pay if you're not 100% sure of yourself. And again, that's the exact position they find themselves in. Their game plan revolves way too heavily around waiting around for Shy to kill stuff, and against a veteran roster like this, that is not going to cut it. The Los Angeles Valiant versus the Chengdu Hunters. Pencil it in, boys, this has to be a key match of the week for sure. Not only could this be a really tight game, but it could have massive implications on the play-in tournament. Chengdu looked very good last week, but you could also argue the Valiant did too. I thought for sure that the Valiant were going to lay down and die after No Hill stepped down as head coach, but it seems to actually be having the opposite effect. Instead of getting worse, it has inspired this team to play even better. The tank tandem of Marvel and Sashin gives the Valiant a lot of good flexibility, and the DPS are also stepping up. It's still early to tell, of course, but this Valiant team may actually be kind of scary in the current meta. But at the same time, so could Chengdu, which means that we're kind of trending towards this 50-50 territory. On one hand, the Hunters clearly have the best playmaker in this lobby, but on the other, LA have showcased better Sombra play. Man, this is a really tough decision to make. Chengdu certainly had the better week overall, but they have not played a team with the Valiant's playstyle yet, and historically they have not performed very well versus this group this year. But something tells me this is finally Chengdu's stage. This is where they finally break through thanks to all of their available comfort picks. Also, the Valiant have this tendency to lead people on with a strong start just to not deliver. This team stringing together solid consecutive weeks has yet to happen. Also, Leave and Jinmu are a really good match for the Valiant DPS. So in my opinion, I think Leave's going to play a lot more hit scan to counter Easyhan compared to MN3, let's say, and I'd say that Jinmu has proven that he's actually a decent tracer, so maybe he does pretty well in a matchup versus Becky. And thanks to Chengdu's better overall synergy, I'd like to think that they're going to get over the hump here. It's going to be a close game that goes either way, but I'm going to pick the Hunters in a 3-2 victory, as the Valiant don't win map 5s all that often. Seeing them win 2 in a row just feels very unlikely, and I think this game is going to be close no matter what. But even so, I'm expecting a pretty entertaining matchup, so definitely watch this one closely. Anyway, next we have the Guangzhou Charge versus the Seoul Dynasty. While I really appreciate the level of play Guangzhou have shown us so far, it's very difficult to see an upset happening here, as the Dynasty were so incredibly dominant last week, and the Charge were maybe a bit inconsistent. I mean, they beat the same Dragons team, but it was a lot harder compared to what Seoul did. And if we're going off of a parameter like this, then Seoul should be winning 3-0. The biggest playmakers on the side of Guangzhou in this meta are Piggy and Choi, and Seoul seem to have the perfect counters to them. Smurf and Prophet have played at a very high level this year, and they definitely have what it takes to outmuscle and outfavor their opponents thanks to better overall support. If the Charge wish to win this game, they're going to have to enable their tanks and DPS. But if they want that to happen, then it's going to start with their supports. Xerneas, in my opinion, after what I saw last week, needs to do a better job of staying alive. And with his general playstyle and mentality, it's difficult to see something like this happening. Vindime's going to play smarter, and on top of that, Iris will have more of an impact than Farway. And when that happens, I believe that Guangzhou will crumble, as Seoul once again will have their number. The London Spitfire versus the Dallas Fuel. Yeah, this is an unlucky week if you're a London fan. Pretty much take exactly what I said in their matchup with the Glads and throw it directly into this one, because Dallas know exactly how to find their way in this meta. They're always happy to play the Sombra, and without the Rhine comp, I say that Hanbin likely makes the more significant plays compared to Hadi. Another underrated aspect of this game, though, likely comes through Edison versus Backbone, as both guys played pivotal roles in week 1 of the Countdown Cup as the flex gods, so to speak. This matchup will be very important in deciding a winner, and if we're a betting person here, you probably trust in Edison in the Fuel to get it done. That guy's played some really good Overwatch the last month or so, and the Backbone that we get really does depend on the week. This should be going the way of Dallas in a sweep since they are just way more consistent and this meta is way better for them. I have little to no faith in London against a top level team in a dive meta. They might have gotten the job done in week 1, but they were far from perfect against some lackluster teams if we're being honest, and against a hot Dallas team, anything less than perfect likely means you're done for. Next is the Washington Justice and the NYXL. Okay, on paper, this one should feel pretty obvious. Washington had a very competitive week against 2 of the top teams in North America. In New York, they were pretty inconsistent. But an obvious outcome is exactly what the league wants us to think here. If I know the Justice, they're going to find a way to make this interesting. They just had a really big week, and that's when everybody's finally going to be watching them, and that is when they're going to find a way to make everybody scratch their heads again. I am fully expecting those inconsistencies they're known for to come through once again. And in theory, it could be even worse since Assassin is back on his very hit or miss Sombra. I prefer them over New York in pretty much every way, I'll be honest. But because it is the Justice, we're going to end up getting this crazy intense butt-clenching map 5. I just know it. I'ma say that New York maintains some of their momentum as both Yaki and Flora do find a way to keep up with the biggest threats on the side of Washington. Like I said last week, desperation is a powerful tool. New York's season is on the line, and they're going to push back hard because they don't want it to end so soon. All it takes is one map to frustrate their opponents, and suddenly this team remembers how to play Overwatch. And because it's the Justice, that very well might happen. But ultimately, I do think that Washington hold on in a 3-2. I just can't go against them after such a solid week. They feel hungry to prove themselves, and surely that elusive win over San Francisco has them feeling pretty good. They have the better overall team, and the NYXL are a bit too inconsistent to trust in. Next, we have the San Francisco Shock taking on the Atlanta Reign, and this is where things maybe get a little dicey. As previously discussed, the Shock have shown some early struggles adjusting to the chaos, but knowing them, they'll have a strong chance of bouncing back since they are so talented, but against a team of this caliber, it may not be that easy. The Reign, at least in my opinion, are set to have a solid stage, and also it's worth noting that they have played the Shock relatively close all season, including a victory over them during the kickoff clash. The Reign have the confidence to knock a team like this down, and playing fearlessly against the Shock, somebody who expects you to bow down to them, is a powerful ally, especially because, as of right now, the Shock are very used to things going their way with how their season has gone, and now that they're losing, it's maybe shaken up their mental a tiny bit. They're going to make adjustments for sure, but will that be enough? Hawk most definitely can take over this game on D.Va and Doom, and if the Shock continue to force ball while their supports make mistakes amongst the chaos, I kinda get the feeling they'll end up losing. I could be reaching big time here, but maybe there's a chance that the Shock are starting to get a little tired. They wouldn't be the first team who has dominated all year to run out of steam right when it matters the most. I'm expecting to be wrong here, but how about we go with an upset to spice things up? The Reign are going to stun the Shock in a 5-map thriller. It seems so unlikely that Proper will be the only guy to show up for a second consecutive week, but it is possible in theory, especially if Vigilante and Ultraviolet continue to play at a very high level. The Reign need to disrupt the flow, and now is the best opportunity while the Shock are in a haze. Frustrate them a couple of times early on while they're confused, and victory could be yours. If Venom and maybe Speedily can annoy the Shock backline enough, and if San Fran maybe stay in their own heads a little too much, there is a world where they lose yet again. The Reign's motivation, as well as the film, could be enough to get them a win. The Philadelphia Fusion versus the Guangzhou Charge will start off the final day of APAC, and to be completely honest, I'm very torn. The Fusion and Charge had a similar week to each other, a high quality win as well as a tough loss, and in general, they've been pretty close to one another on the ladder so to speak since the beginning of the last tournament. The main difference between these two comes through playstyle. The Fusion seemed very interested in playing a variety of things, especially the Sombra and Winston, while Guangzhou preferred a lot of the Zarya, Genji, and Reaper. Will one style of play end up being more advantageous than the other? It's hard to say. I mean, truly, it's going to be a tough game to judge. But in general, I do not love the Fusion where they are currently, because when MN3 is off of his carry heroes, I just get this feeling that they're not going to play as well. Although, to be fair, to make some sort of counterpoint, Guangzhou could end up suffering a lot in the tank battle because Philly's tank line is more well-rounded, and if the Fusion do decide to change up their strategy a bit, that could be an issue if they outrange the Charge's Reaper and Genji stuff because they do prefer a lot of the close-ranged combat. I don't know what to do here, man. I mean, both teams feel so very close and so similar in many ways. So you know what? Because I'm so indecisive, I think it's time that we bring back an old friend to help make up my mind. Mr. Coin Flip, if you'd please. Well, there you have it. The coin has foreseen it, ladies and gentlemen. The Guangzhou Charge are going to win a close 5-map series. It was really hard for me to decide, so I figured why not do something for the content that could be kind of fun. Let's leave it up to fate. But in all seriousness, if Philly have that lack of MN3 explosiveness, there is a good chance that the Charge can take advantage. It's not going to be easy, of course, but they're proven that they can play hard still. They are still a good team even through the meta changes. And Philly have already lost to this group once before, so why not let it fly? To finish up APAC this week, you've got the LA Valiant versus the Hangzhou Spark. Under most circumstances, I would pick the Spark without hesitation as they've had the Valiant's number all year, but the Spark right now are in a very vulnerable state. They do not look inspiring, and the future seems very uncertain. You just get this feeling that they're trying to figure a lot of stuff out as they go, and it's leading to a lot of struggles. And while the Valiant are nowhere close to perfect, they showed a lot of promise on a variety of compositions last week. They showed off some excellent flexibility on a bunch of different maps without missing a beat. And I mean, the Spark, they tried to do much of the same, but they had a very little success rate, and it's largely due to some major adjustments that still need to be made. Changing up a bunch of your starting lineup with newer players is going to take a lot of time. This is not something that's going to resolve overnight, and that's obviously a problem considering how late we are into the season at this point. So for obvious reasons, I prefer the LA Valiant as they clearly know what they're doing and have a lot more confidence in their play. Marvel's play has looked a lot more consistent than Gushway's, and the Valiant DPS have shown for once that they truly mean business. For once, I am actually convinced that the Valiant hold all of the cards. I do not say that often. So for that reason, I am going to be picking LA in a 3-1 over the Spark. Honestly, the Spark just need to show me something first. I'm going to assume they will continue to struggle until otherwise. It truly feels like they're panicking, and nobody but Shy is showing up right now, and obviously that is not a winning formula of Overwatch. He might be a great player, but the likes of EasyHan, Dia, and Becky are going to outperform him by simply getting better resources over a longer stretch of time. It's a sad reality to face, but the Spark may actually be the worst team in their region. Next, you've got the LA Gladiators versus the NYXL. If last week taught us anything at all, it's that New York are going to show us promise in spurts. And if they play well against the Justice, like I think they might, then they're going to get rolled pretty hard in this scenario, as there's just not much they can do when they're a lot less talented and coordinated than a title contender like the Glads. If New York want to have any sort of chance of winning, it's going to start with Flora in my eyes. Big performances out of him seem to open up the game for literally everybody. He just has to hit his shots like we saw in the Toronto series. But unfortunately, that might be really hard when he's likely going to face heavy pressure both from Happy and the LA Dive. And because it is New York, I just don't know if they have a solution for this type of thing. But that's not all. I think that Kellen also has to step up big time and not make as many mental errors as we saw towards the end of last week. He needs to be a smarter player, and he has to be on the same page as his supports, and obviously when you're on a not confident team like New York, that's a hard thing to do on a consistent basis. So just because of a pure team gap, this should be an LA sweep. The NYXL basically lose in all situations here, and I just don't know what they're going to do. Next is going to be a showdown between the Atlanta Reign and Washington Justice, which will be my other big time matchup of this week to look out for. Both teams are definitely rolling on a high right now, with playoff implications on the line depending on who wins this. I mean, seeding means everything, and the Justice can still catch somebody like Atlanta. The confidence and the high stakes are going to lead to a very good show. Once again, I am getting this feeling that the Justice are going to trick us big time. They'll randomly somehow struggle against a worse team, then look good against Atlanta. Just watch. It's gonna happen because it's the Overwatch League and it's the Justice. But why exactly would they do well in a matchup with Atlanta? Well, it's because their DPS and tanks are feeling somewhat comfortable. Kalios has a decent shot of matching Hawk depending on what gets played, as I could see him doing pretty well either in a Zarya or D.Va mirror match. Another solid outing out of him could definitely oppress the Atlanta DPS line. I felt like he did a pretty decent job against the Shock, so why not against the Reign too? Also, this team definitely has just the general skill set needed to win. They've beaten this team once before and they can definitely do it again. They have their craft and they're going to stick with it confidently. The only issue is, the Reign are a bit more well equipped to deal with the current meta. For starters, their support line is more reliable overall. Vigilante and Ultraviolet just looked really good to me last week, and I suspect it's going to carry over. An inconsistent playmaking out of the Washington supports has been one of my biggest criticisms of this team all year. I mean, Krillin and Opener really need to go hard here if the Justice want to win. But also at the same time, I'm of this belief that the Reign just have more options at DPS. Decay and Assassin definitely do have things that work for them, but they're doing everything themselves, while the Reign have a whole army of talented players at their disposal. They've got their Tracer to maybe counter or at least slow down Decay. They have a good Sombra of their own. They can play a bunch of different projectile. They have Kai, who's just the best overall sniper in the lobby. They have everything they need. So I'm going to say that the Reign win a close 5-map series. I like them better in a lot of ways, but the Justice did show they're no joke, and they definitely do deserve your respect. No matter the outcome here, I am fully prepared for a great game. And finally, we end the week with the second Battle of Canada this year. The last time these two played, it was very, very close. But a lot has definitely changed since then, as both sides have definitely gotten worse. But when looking back at the film from last week, I'd say the Titans are clearly in the worst spot. The Defiant might have gone 0-2, but they did have a lot of solid maps, and they did go to 2-map 5s. On the other hand, Vancouver mostly struggled with not a lot of bright spots. Now that the meta is more focused on some individual playmakers again, the Titans can't really capitalize on D-Pace coaching as much. But at the same time, the increased Sombra and Tracer play could also be throwing them off, as King's Genji and Aspire Sojourn were critical to their success in the previous stage. By throwing them into new roles and giving them a less chaotic meta, there's far less carry potential for them. They're playing up to their strengths with the Doom and Orisa comps to try and compensate, but it's just not enough. The execution is not nearly clean enough. The Defiant may be coming off a pretty poor week themselves, but at least they have all of this stuff figured out. They're a step ahead. A Sombra meta with Winston and Zarya is right up their alley, and they're simply better than what Vancouver are choosing to run, so that leads me to believe that the red team picks up a 3-1. Despite being pretty hard on them earlier in this video, the Defiant are not a horrible team. They choked away a couple of winnable games and still had some bright spots in between, and when considering how much more dangerous their support line is in this particular meta, it feels like they're going to stay in control of this matchup and finally show some consistency for once this stage. It's their game to lose. Simple as that, and I think they're going to take advantage. But I mean, aside from that, that basically concludes all of my thoughts on the games for Week 22. We're inching closer and closer to the playoffs right now, ladies and gentlemen, and we have some big-time games going on this week that'll have some major implications on the standings. So with that in mind, I would love to hear your insight on what happens down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed today's video, it would mean so much to me if you could hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you're new. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.